Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined for episode number 85 by a full panel of people. We are loaded up today. I don't know how good it's going to make for podcasting, but we got four guys talking Cubs prospects today. We got myself, Greg Zumach, Bryan Smith, and Brendan Miller is joining us from the CHGO podcast today. We got a full crew. I mean, Brendan, you feel overwhelmed by the prospect guys in this?
I kind of do. I feel honored. I mean, just seeing my name with Bryan and the Gregs over here, I'm like looking up number 25 prospects before I got on. A little anxiety, but I can hang. I can talk Cubs prospects with you guys.
I think that's just you fluffing us up, getting ready to tear us back down in a little bit. So I think that's fair. I think that was a wise move on your part, personally.
Thank you.
I think that was good. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Guys, we're here to talk. We have prospect lists to talk about today. We have trades to talk about. We have, I guess, the entire system as a whole to look at today. We have a whole lot to cover in about an hour. Zumach, I'll kick it to you first. How you feeling? We're gonna get into the details of this Kyle Tucker trade. But how are you feeling just overall right now?
Honestly, like a page was turned. We started this, 2021, entering 2022, and a page turned that year. And now, with this Cubs on Deck podcast, like it's amazing that we've been able to kind of watch these steps. A buy move like this just wouldn't have been feasible in the past couple of years. And so now it has, and the ramifications of that will be fantastic to watch. And obviously, go Cubs. Let's see some wins.
I talked about it. I've talked about it before, but it's funny that like I started some sort of a Cubs prospect podcast back in 2019. And my thinking back then was,
shout out Jimmy.
Okay, shout out Jimmy Nelligan. Just got engaged, by the way. Shout out to Jimmy
Congrats
Nelligan.
to Jimmy.
And we started back in 2019 with the thought process of like, oh, like right now, like Cubs fans need something. It's kind of teetering towards not looking good for the Cubs in the future. And we needed something to look forward to. So we're talking prospects with the thought process that like, all right, in a few years, the Cubs will be back and the farm system won't be nearly as good. And this will kind of teeter off a little bit. We won't have people listening into a Cubs prospect podcast. And then we're sitting here in 2024 now. And right now with this Kyle Tucker trade, it feels like finally we're looking at a team that is trading away prospects to make their major league team better. And that it took way too long for that to happen, right? The farm system got too good. I don't like that it was this good because it means that the Cubs major league team was not as good. And it seems like it's a finally, right? Finally situation. Right? Don't you feel like that's the case, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, when we come on and we, hype prospects up all summer, like it's sort of unnatural to have the conversation like, well, we should then trade this guy this winter, right? But like that is part of prospects and following them is like you hope that a good number of them become all-stars for your team, of course, but you also hope that they help you get all-stars from other teams, especially when you're a fan of a club with a $200 million payroll. And, kudos to Jed Hoyer and kudos to Dan Kantrovitz for helping sort of get this trade over the hump. And I'm excited. I mean, I think all of our Cub fandoms probably started somewhere around Sammy Sosa, and to have a top right fielder in baseball again and in Wrigley is just going to be make for a fantastic 2025.
Brendan, go ahead. Yeah,
I think it's finally good for you guys to actually express a significant trade involving prospects for big league talent. Unfairly, you guys kind of get some comments about being too prospect heavy, right? Prospect hugging. But knowing you guys for many years, anything but that. This is what the prospect system's for, to make these trades. And I feel like unanimously, I think it was good for the Cubs online community to see you guys actually be forthright and excited that, hey, like they are improving the major league team. Like, yes, we're giving up Cam Smith. Yes, he is a top prospect, maybe going to fly through the system next year, but it is about winning at the big league level. And that is always the context that these prospects and the farm system should be discussed about.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I think that I guess let's recap the trade, right? We haven't actually said the trade. The Cubs acquired Kyle Tucker. I'm sure that if you're listening to this podcast, you're well aware of that.
If
Trading
we're
away,
breaking it to you now,
Yeah.
get excited. That's
I don't know why you're listening to us. If you found us and you haven't found out, I don't know how the hell the algorithm got to you.
Exactly. So the Cubs did trade away Isaac Paredes and Hayden Wesneski. We probably won't be talking about those guys. We will be talking about Cam Smith, who last year was the Cubs' first-round draft pick, who is now a Houston Astro and the top prospect in the Houston Astros system as soon as he was acquired there. I know that we had him as a top 100 type prospect in the Cubs organization or in all of baseball and a top 5-ish prospect in the Cubs organization. But I guess I'll kick it to you first, Brendan, on what your immediate reaction and I guess reaction now that you've had some time to process everything is to the Kyle Tucker, Cam Smith transaction.
The first reaction was being ecstatic. The value of having a guy who can shrink down the volatility or the variance is huge for me. Like when I watch the Cubs, I want to have a sense of easiness. I don't like watching close games. I don't like watching close playoff games. I've never been one for drama. I want like 10-0 blowouts. And my worst case scenario as a fan is when a team goes through an injury bug, whether it be last year when the bullpen was faltering, injuries happened. That is my worst case scenario because that's where all the randomness and the nonsense can happen. And for as much good that the Cubs did last year, it was that May and June spell that sunk them. So when a guy like Tucker gets acquired, the chances that happens again dramatically go down when there's a lull. And then I start thinking, okay, well, who are we giving up? Paredes, Cam Smith, Hayden Wesneski. The way I think about trying to understand the value gained versus lost for Paredes, in my mind, you think about the ceiling. And that's one of the reasons why he was acquired for Morel. The ceiling for him is a guy with a 330, 340, maybe 350 plus weight on base average, cost control for 3 years. And that's under a cost-efficient scenario for this front office. Then I start thinking, okay, well, what about the floor? And how confident am I in the floor as well as the ceiling? And then I start thinking, well, with Paredes, even though the ceiling is 4 WAR and he's had a great start to his career, what do we use to measure him up against? And with him, he has extreme outlier batting mechanics, traits, although he strikes out not that much and hits for moderate power. It's the way in which he goes about providing that value. And to me, that was a little uneasy. And so my thinking was, well, his worst case scenario, let's say 1 to 1.5 WAR, high case scenario, 4 WAR, somewhere around 2.5 to 3. You look at Tucker, the floor is around 4 WAR. So there's no overlap. The peak for Paredes is Tucker's floor. And then the question becomes, well, with Cam Smith and Hayden Wesneski, what's their potential value for next year? And it's not really certain for even Wesneski. So then for me, the trade becomes an obvious gain for the Cubs. It does not discount what those 3 guys could provide for Houston, but for the Cubs from next year, it seems pretty obvious to me. As a result of that, I was pretty excited right away.
Bryan, I'll kick it to you for your take on the wild ride that was the last 5 months of Cam Smith, the Cubs prospect.
Yeah, I mean, it's so rare for a guy to get drafted and to splash in his debut like Cam did. I mean, the home run streak too it's such a specific way to pop. It's like the most sort of in your face way for a prospect to possibly pop is to homer in 5 straight games or whatever the final number was.
6.
Was it 5 or 6?
6. Yeah.
Okay. And then triple in the AA debut, just an amazing start to that year. And I when I was thinking about, it was reported pretty early on that the Astros wanted Matt Shaw or Cam Smith, and it made me think about the big Cubs trades of this decade. The Michael Busch trade, the Yu Darvish trade once upon a time. I think what we've learned is that as prospects are getting traded, one thing that's changed from when we were growing up maybe is top 100 prospects, top 20 prospects, top 10 prospects almost never get traded anymore, right? So Matt Shaw was just not going to get traded. That was not realistic. But when a prospect does get traded, teams now are always going to go for the upside, and we're going to talk about a lot of the Cubs top 10 today, but like the Astros would much rather take Cam Smith, and to Brendan's point, his volatility and variance, because if you're going to get a prospect, give me someone who can be that guy in the end. And they're not going to care as much about the guys that are really close to the majors, the guys that are more sure bets. And that was interesting. I mean, the Cubs did that once upon a time with Yu Darvish, going like all upside players as far away as possible. And the Astros did that in choosing Cam over pursuing a Cade Horton or something here.
Well, I feel like the Astros actually kind of they covered both of their bases, where like they got Paredes and Wisniewski, who kind of already had, like, they have that like safer bet, where like Brendan just talked about, where Isaac Paredes is a 1.5 floor with a 4 WAR ceiling, right? And so
so if you're going to give me a safe bet, give me a major leaguer.
Exactly. Well,
because there's no such, maybe what baseball is saying is there's no such thing as a safe prospect, So like, just give me upside.
So it makes more sense to go Paredes and Cam Smith maybe over Paredes and James Triantos. But there's also probably more value there. But
it's more likely Houston gets value for the next 3 years than going with more just pure prospect hype, if you will. So from Houston, if I'm a Houston Astros fan, I'm actually quite excited too, even though I just lost, a superstar player, but you get back some realistic sense of value right away, and then a pretty high ceiling. So I think as an Astros fan, you also have to be quite encouraged by that deal, even though, again, you just lost your perhaps favorite player. Thanks.
I'm interested in the trade and how all of that happened. I want to kick it to Zumach for your thoughts on it too. But also, like, we were talking a little bit before we came on and started recording, the concept of now third base is open. Matt Shaw was not part of that trade. How does he fit into that equation at third base in the major leagues?
Are you kicking it to me?
I'll kick it to you. Might as well.
So might as well. That's the introduction I love. So real quick, touching on the trade, one point I wanted to make is that on the Northside Territory, there's a lot of Northsides out there. There's on the Northside Territory podcast with Sahadev and Patrick, they've loved to use this phrase "wins in and wins out," and a way of describing how baseball executives are viewing decisions on baseball decision making. And in many ways, I could see just from like Isaac Paredes and Hayden Wisniewski, very possible that over the next 3 to 4 years, they get slightly more wins than Kyle Tucker may provide next season. And for them, that makes a lot of sense. Like, we're going to spread this out. Whereas the Cubs want to compile that. They want it all at one time. And in many ways, the Astros got a bit of a sampling menu. Like, they got one top prospect, one interesting pitching project, and one safe major leaguer. It's just like let me take one from each bucket, one appetizer from each plate. And in many ways, that's just a different way of viewing it. The Cubs have done that in the past. Also, getting to Brian's point, they've targeted the real high upside guys. 2021 PCA, like 6 plate appearances in single A, but everybody was banking on the upside. Kevin Alcantara, unbelievably toolsy player down in the complex league. We're gonna go after the upside, right? Like, it was just interesting how they gravitated towards that. So I think the Cubs were in many ways doing something very similar. Now this opens up a lot of the conversations for the Cubs, and like, getting to your point, Matt Shaw. I saw Matt Shaw a bit defensively. It looked very shaky. And I'm trying not to let a couple appearances kind of cloud me there, because I didn't get to watch him this fall in the Premier 12 showcase and tournament. And the feedback from very reputable baseball people, they might be business people too, very like respectable prospect evaluators like Eric Longenhagen off of Fangraphs are saying, Matt Shaw's looking really good at third base. And I will be I would happily offer a mea culpa there, because when I evaluated him in Omaha, when I saw him pre-draft, when I've watched him in person and just in general as a prospect, I didn't think it would coalesce And I'm
What was the issue?
really happy. So 2 things. It's not range, by the way. People are like, oh, he's not rangy. No. I've seen him make one of the most athletic plays that I've ever seen in person. An incredible rangy play. Is it arm strength? Maybe a little bit. Honestly, it was the throwing motion. So when I watched him, he threw like Ian Happ does, which is totally fine because Ian Happ's an outfielder, but he throws him a very over-the-top motion. And so when we were seeing him do like infield practice and even during the game, he would have to set up in a way that he could make the throws very straight, very direct, and very over the top. And when you're thinking about third base, coming in on a ball and making a play across the diamond, when you're thinking about second base, ranging and doing just even a touch of what the athleticism that Nico Horner says that does, it's just really difficult to try to create new arm angles that an infielder would feel comfortable. It's not impossible. It just takes a lot of reps. So I more just wanted to see it. I mean, Eric Longenhagen mentioned potentially plus at third base. Honestly, I'm here for that. That I would happily say I'm wrong there, because that would be an immense profile for the Cubs.
Has he changed any of his throwing motions in the past year and a half since being drafted? Even like a slight hint of adjustment that you've seen?
I mean, a little bit. I think he's.
It's not obvious though.
I've never seen him play third base from like pre-draft versus now. So I think it might just be playing a different position. Yeah. I think it looks pretty similar, but he just does have a lot of athleticism. So he might be just making it work for him.
That the throw that it might, like the motion that you're describing, where that might be a problem is when you turn a double play at second base is like the most natural time for that to sort of be an impediment, throwing that over the top, not being able to sort of drop down if a base runner's coming at you, things like that. And so maybe third base in the end is actually a better fit because, you take away that one sort of part that never felt maybe natural and you move it there. And like you said, I would also say, I think Matt moves forward and backwards really well. I think to his left, maybe sometimes not as great. Hopefully the fact that the Cubs have one of the best defenders in the world at shortstop, makes that a little easier. We'll see to the right. I don't know that, we've necessarily seen enough at third base to say one way or the other, but I guess I count in the camp of believers that this is going to work. And, if it works as like a -4 runs a year defender, that's not going to hurt that much the overall profile.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick? Because Brian brought up an amazing point, which is going to his left, it isn't great. Going to his right, don't have a lot of data points. From the feedback that I got when I asked around about Premier 12, they had him playing very close to the line. So it might make a lot of sense to just be able to channel all his movement and momentum to the left side, keep hugging the line. And like Brian is saying, we've got an all-world defender at shortstop who can cover a lot of ground, so he doesn't have to feel like he needs to do it. I think there's a lot going in the right direction.
Yeah, I'll throw in too that playing closer to the line does make sense, because while I don't think that his arm strength is bad, I think that him backhanding at third base and throwing to first isn't exactly a strength. Throwing motion aside, I think just in terms of arm strength, and so that might help a little bit by playing closer to the line. We'll see, but
all your movement becomes the momentum goes towards first base.
Exactly, so you're not backhanding, planting your right foot, and then turning around, spinning around, and turning to throwing to first base. So I don't know. I think that I'm in the camp that where I'm interested to see what happens with him at third base. I would have been more interested to see him not penciled in as the starting third baseman in Chicago to start off the season. I would have loved to see him bounce around to start off and have more time to figure out, is he a third baseman? Is he a second baseman? Is he a left fielder? What is Matt Shaw? I would have loved and still would love for him to, because I've said multiple times that I think that Matt Shaw can log enough plate appearances in Chicago next year without being a starter at one position. I think he can do it. I think he can do it by playing a decent amount of third base and relieving Nico at second base a few times, getting some DH at bats, maybe in a corner outfield, just playing all over. I think he could do that. And so I still would really like to see him in that role, but I'm also not going to complain too much if we have a top prospect in all of baseball playing third base on a daily basis for the Chicago Cubs, while also having a top 10 hitter in all of baseball play right field. So this trade kind of works out in both of those regards. All right, guys, you want to dig into our prospect list here?
Let's do it.
I feel like we just started.
I know. So let's. This past week over at Northside Bound, both myself and Greg Zumach released in addition to Rich Biesterfeld and Todd Johnson, all released our prospect rankings as well as our composite of all of our rankings combined. So it was prospect week last week at Northside Bound. I did my top 40 prospects. Zumach, you did your top 23, I believe, prospects.
22 or 23 ranked, and then broken down the rest of them by tiers.
Yes. And then, Bryan, you have also updated your top prospect rankings. So the three of us have top prospect rankings to share here on the show. And then this is really the main reason why we brought you on, Brendan, was to grill us on our prospect rankings.
Well, I have my top 100 list. I got from 80 to 100. I want to get your guys' feedback on.
Okay, then
Starlin Pichardo, number 88.
Oh, stop!
you came to the
now
right.
You're making me
place.
look bad. Okay.
So what I'll do here is we'll make sure that this is still a good podcast for audio only listeners. Really appreciate you guys tuning in on Spotify and Apple and all that good stuff afterwards. We'll make sure that it's still good there. In addition, on YouTube, I will have this screen to share with our prospect rankings. I'll kind of flip back and forth throughout mine, Bryan's, and Zumach's throughout this conversation. But really, Brendan, this is why I brought you on. I wanted to kind of shift things to you. You can play host and just ask us about our prospect list. I know that I'll lead off leading to you by saying that the thing with our list is the top 9 guys on both of our rankings are the same dudes. They're the same prospects on the top 9. They're different orders, but the top 9 are the same 9 people. And I'll run through those 9 names. You guys listening probably already know these guys and know their top 9 prospects, but I'll say them anyways. We've got Matt Shaw, Owen Caissie, Cade Horton, Moises Ballesteros, Kevin Alcantara, James Triantos, and Jefferson Rojas are the dudes that have been top 100 prospects in some publication, whether it's Baseball America or MLB Pipeline at some point. And then we both tacked on, or all 3 of us have tacked on Jaxon Wiggins and Brendan Birdsell as to round out the top 9. Those were the top 10 with Cam Smith thrown in the mix here, but those are the same top 9 that each of us have in different orders. So, Brendan, I will kick things over to you.
I'm taking over the show. I'm now the host. Greg's been demoted to double A over here. I'm taking over. The first question, I see your guys' list. Everyone has a different way of thinking about like future value and immediate value. I look at Matt Shaw, Moises, Cade Horton, Owen Caissie, et cetera, et cetera. The difference I want to ask you guys first, and I'll ask you first, Greg. For Matt Shaw and Moises Ballesteros, I feel as if projecting Moises' bats is actually easier for me. And just to be brief with my thoughts on this, the principal reason I believe that is because I think the power output is just a little bit higher. And I think he's shown at every level, and Shaw has to some degree, but I think Moises to a slightly better degree, an ability to make more the contact. And I know there's been issues perhaps against certain hard stuff from Moises, but I feel as if the surface numbers actually favor him more than Shaw. And the caveat to Moises is that, he can't catch, but we've been talking about Matt Shaw's defensive shortcomings as well. So I'm curious, how close were those two in your prospect rankings and to Bryan and Zumach as well?
So you're talking between Matt Shaw and Moises?
Yeah. How close is that gap?
Yeah. I don't know. I'll say that these first 4 guys entirely, Matt Shaw, Owen Caissie, Cade Horton, and Moises Ballesteros, are super, super interchangeable in my mind. I think Matt Shaw has been consensus number 1 across the board for everybody. And I think that that's safe considering what we've seen him do at the upper levels of the minors and the fact that his defensive although we just spent a decent amount of time talking about his defensive question marks at third base, I actually feel more comfortable in projecting him as an infielder or an outfielder compared to Moises Ballesteros and the question marks that come with his defensive skill set. So I think that that's why Matt Shaw becomes number one. The mix of Owen, Caissie, Cade Horton, and Moises Ballesteros just gets so tricky. I went back and forth every 5 minutes, exchanging these guys, moving these guys around, and I eventually had to sit down and just say, all right, this is where I'm gonna put these three. That's how it's gonna be. Sorry to Moises ranked number 4, Cade Horton ranked number 3. I think that Matt Shaw, it is fun because I think that like they are similar hitters in a lot of different ways, right? Where like you look at each of these guys and your first thought with them was that they're contact oriented, they're bat to ball type guys that can also kind of surprise you with some pop from time to time, right? And I think that what Moises has been able to do a little bit, definitely younger, obviously, but a little bit quicker, is actually tap into some more of that pull side power. We saw Matt Shaw start to do it towards the end of last season a little bit better, but he was oppo. And Moises Ballesteros came up as doing that, but he started to tap into some more pull side power last year. So like I think that's why you can kind of project that power a little bit better with Moises than with Matt Shaw. But really, like the offensive profiles are pretty damn similar. Obviously, one's a lefty, one's a righty. Like they go about it in a little bit different ways. I think that Moises Ballesteros' plate approach seems to be a little bit better in terms of just like working counts, working deeper counts. But really, like they're not. I don't think either of these guys are. I don't think either of these guys are like 35 plus home run hitters. I think it's everything about them combined makes them good quality future major league hitters, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Zumach, your thoughts on that?
They were very close to me. So if you go to mine, it was Sean Ballesteros 1-2. And I think Greg and Bryan can attest. I feel like I'm losing my voice, but if I'm losing my voice over defending the Shaw versus Ballesteros argument, I will happily lose it. My students will be so thrilled. I can't talk. But this was very close for me, to the point that earlier in the offseason, it was kind of like mid-Premier 12. I still had Ballesteros, and I was soliciting feedback and like from a round of people that I had him 1. And so here's my thought process on that. Everything Greg illustrated is right. I think ultimately defensively, the valuation is just going to raise that profile of Shaw that I couldn't justify it. I think Moises could truly be a special hitter. What he showed in specifically Double-A was an incredible amount of incredibly impressive plate discipline. So I will refrain from referencing specific numbers because I had to ask some industry folks about this. But if you look at his composite Double-A, and I'm talking about Ballesteros, Double-A and Triple-A plate discipline, it just okay and not super great. But in many ways, it was Triple-A where he was being a bit of more of a free swinger. And maybe I'm just kind of setting that to the side, but he's 20 years old facing 32-year-olds who can dot the outside corner at the changeup. He wouldn't even be draft eligible until next year. And so I'm willing to give a lot of grace. What he did in Double-A was incredible. He had a very nice chase rate, low 20%, swinging at pitches in the zone. Actually, his feedback at the time was you should be swinging at more pitches in the zone. Love the plate discipline. I truly think the Ballesteros is a special bat. But I think it's going to have to be to really justify it. And where that ends up going, I don't know defensively, but I love them both. I was very impressed with them this season.
I know that the three, Zumach, Bryan, and I were having some text conversations about Matt Shaw versus Moises Ballesteros. Bryan, you want to talk a little bit about like that, where that value offensively might come, or offensively and defensively might come with, or come from these two guys?
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can do is you can sort of project this out for like, what do these players look like from a WAR perspective, right? And no matter if Ballesteros makes it a catcher or not, we know he's going to spend a significant amount of time at DH. Obviously, that's going to bring down the numbers. And if you sort of start to model it out in your head, you say, okay, maybe I think there's a 25% chance he sticks at catcher. What is that worth from a positional standpoint? Is it as much as a third baseman or a second baseman that Shaw might be? Like the math starts to, I think, not work in Ballesteros' favor as much. The other thing that I was going to say was I feel like because of the way they look in a uniform, we feel like, and the way that we talk about Ballesteros' bat, we feel like it's almost fait accompli that Moises ends up with more power than Matt Shaw. And I guess I would ask you guys, why are we saying that? Because I don't really think that there's and I'm not saying you guys are, but I'm saying the broader community, like starting to make that assumption, I don't think is necessarily fair. There's not been a single level in the minor leagues that Moises Ballesteros has produced more isolated power than Matt Shaw. And Matt Shaw is a guy who hit, 20 home runs in college. This is an accomplished power bat. And Ballesteros has not come by power naturally. It's been something the Cubs have really worked for. Last year was really the first evidence we got of a breakthrough. The Arizona Fall League, those first couple of weeks were like, oh my gosh, is it happening? Is it happening? But until it happens, I think the assumption should probably be that Matt Shaw projects for more power in the majors than Ballesteros until we see otherwise.
Wasn't there, correct me if I'm wrong, Huss, the two Gregs over here, you're making my brain all gooey. I get it all mixed up. Wasn't there like a change in spray profile for Moises at some point that was quite stark, or am I misremembering that?
No, so I haven't seen a spray chart. But I know that when he was coming up, when he was in Myrtle and South Bend, there was a whole lot more opposite way, which is weird though, because the defenses played him to pull though. When he was in Myrtle and South Bend, I know that there's less data on these guys, but like the infields were swung around as much as they could with the new rules, obviously, but they were swung around playing him to pull. And he would punch the ball the other way quite a bit. I think he's doing that less than he once was, but he still can do that from time to time.
I believe Arizona Phil at the Cub Reporter has said that before the 2023 season, the Cubs worked with very specific instruction to get Ballesteros to pull the ball for power more in spring training, and it did not go well at all. And it was he was in the first funk of his career, really. And they just told him, you know what, forget it. Like, go back to doing what you do. And then this year kind of slowly started bringing that back a little bit, and it took a little better. But, what that sort of lesson taught me was this is not something he necessarily comes by supernaturally. I think as maybe he gets stronger and stronger, maybe it will just be easier and easier to access. But, I do think Matt comes by power somewhat more naturally.
Yeah. So I think the thing that I'll push back on, I think you're absolutely right, Brian, that I think that Matt Shaw has shown more power throughout his entire career than Moises Ballesteros. And I think that the natural reason to think that people assume Moises Ballesteros will ultimately display more power than Matt Shaw is because of you look at their bodies and you assume that's the case. But really, I think what I look at is the swing. I think that's why my mind immediately goes to oh, that swing looks like a power hitter.
Yeah, same.
Moises Ballesteros. Matt Shaw, that swing does not look like any major league 30 home run guy I've ever seen.
Let me say this though. Look at their shoulders when they're hitting the baseball and tell me who's hitting up on the baseball and who's hitting the baseball square.
I think you're exactly right. I wouldn't argue that. It's just it's when we're looking at prospects, a lot of times, whether or not we care to admit it, we're looking for major league comps in everything that we do, right? I'm looking for, where is Matt Shaw, who looks like that pre-pitch? Where is he doing? Where's a guy that's doing that in the major leagues? And it doesn't exist. Versus I can point to a guy that looks like Moises Ballesteros is swinging in the major leagues. There's guys that look like that when they load, when they set up, when they load, when they swing, when they connect. Matt Shaw, the connection is similar to other guys, but the setup and the load is definitely not. And I think that's where my mind just gets warped to just assuming that Moises Ballesteros will, based on that fact and that fact alone, which is probably unfortunate.
Yeah, for me, it's a matter of looking at both their power projections. There's overlap for the reasons Brian said: the athleticism, the shoulders. He's a psycho with the leg kick. He just looks like a freak that you just typically don't see. Then you look at Moises and you see someone who's more controlled. You see the big body frame. You see the ease with which he makes contact. And so for me, it's kind of hard to project which one's naturally going to have more home runs. So as a result of that, I fall back on, well, who's displayed so far? Maybe I'll get pushed back on this, but who's displayed so far better swing decisions? And so here's where it may look on paper that it's Matt Shaw. You look at the chase rate in AAA, and he looks like he's made better decisions. I try to put myself in their shoes when they transition to the big leagues. And I look at Moises, and of course you can see the chase rate being off by 5 percentage points. But I look at, okay, when he is swinging outside the zone, is he making contact or is it just whips? And for Moises, he is making more contact outside the zone than his average peer. So then I started thinking, okay, well, he's tracking the ball, right? He's 20 years old. He hasn't seen these guys yet at all. There's a 3-year age difference between the two. So if someone's showing a natural ability to make more contact and also not really being super aggressive at that age, and they project to have similar power, then it becomes a matter of frequency of contact. And if that's the case, because he has maybe a better chance to put the ball in play more, maybe more in the air, just by default, more fly balls, more home runs. So that's the way I kind of think about it right now. But if you're going to look purely based on like, aggressive swing or just freak athleticism, then your guy is probably Matt Shaw projecting more power.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation, especially considering I think one of the reasons, the reason why I have Moises Ballesteros at 4, as opposed to, I think both of these other guys have him at 2, right? Zumach and Bryan both have Moises Ballesteros at 2. I have him at 4. It comes down to what Zumach kind of hinted at. He's just gonna have to hit. Like he's gonna have to hit. And even if he does get some innings behind the plate, even if he's a third catcher, whatever that may be, he's gonna have to hit. This is the highest I've ever ranked a guy that I view as a DH or first baseman. And I know that there's still a chance that he can be a catcher, but like I'm viewing for my prospect rankings purposes as a DH long term. And I've never ranked a guy this high. So like I think that should be a compliment that I'm ranking him this high, not like, oh, I'm lower on Moises than Zumach and Bryan. You know what I mean? So these two guys are super interesting. And there's a reason I think I'm glad you brought up these two first, because I think these are the two guys we should be talking about first.
Well, let's switch to Owen Caissie over here. So, of course, AAA proximity, young bat as well. Had an encouraging year last year. Defensive discussions as well. Likewise with Matt Shaw, Biesterfeld. You look at the Cubs, their crowded outfield situation, maybe even a crowded first base situation. Should Bellinger stay and you have Bush at first base? It's a similar discussion, I feel like, with Ballesteros and Shaw in terms of just like, is he going to be a good defender? But when we start rating like defensive value going forward, again, back to the gap discussion, how much of a gap is there between Ballesteros achieving defensive competency versus Owen achieving defensive competency at any position?
I think Caissie's pretty good in right field.
Yeah.
Like he's really improved. So Brendan, I'm not sure because we dig into like the super minutia here. So Owen Caissie is
really
an interesting guy. Yeah, I know. This is brand new.
I had no idea.
You, right? So Caissie's really interesting. I'm not sure if you've ever heard this story, but because he played in Canada, a lot of his practices and games where he was fielding fly balls were all inside. And so he actually didn't get a lot of opportunity to practice on getting reads with the ball until basically professional ball, because COVID hit and then everything else. So he looked not very good at the beginning. Like it did not look good. It did not look natural. I think he's been pretty good. They've even I don't know how many games they tossed him in center. Was it like a couple? That's probably not an experiment that needs to continue, but like I thought he was actually really good in right field and the arm plays.
Yeah, so I actually think the arm has continued to improve. It was already good. The arm's gotten even better. He makes better reads on fly balls than he once did because he's had more reps out there. But I think the third thing to throw into this equation is that he's gotten more athletic. I think he's grown in. He's matured in his body. He's gotten a lot stronger. When he first came into the Cubs system, he was this long, lanky guy. He had some muscle, but like he was a little bit of a baby giraffe out there and trying to figure out how to run and take routes and be coordinated enough doing that. He looks a whole lot more athletic on the base paths and in the outfield. I think that makes a big difference too in terms of getting to the ball more efficiently. So that combination of those three elements, like I think Owen Caissie is good. I think I wouldn't call him great. I wouldn't call him plus. I think he's a perfectly fine right fielder. I think he could be a good left fielder. I don't know that he's ever going to fill in center field in the majors, but like I think he's a really decent corner outfielder.
So with looking at Caissie's at bat potential for next season, assuming he's on the team by the time opening day hits, then how do you make this work, right? Like you just acquired Kyle Tucker. I know there were some discussions. I don't know how real they are now these days at giving him more chances at first, but in the outfield, how do you make this work then?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least for the 2025 season, it's just going to be injuries. Like Owen's only way into the big leagues is injuries. He's now on the 40-man roster, so an injury happens, he's a very natural call up. Long term, like we are all going to hope, and we're all just going to like quietly pray that Kyle Tucker stays in Chicago for a long time. And then, maybe Caissie ends up not having a natural spot, and that's a bridge that they're going to have to cross more in 2026. But I think that I don't think that the Cubs feel rushed at all that 2025 needs to hit some checkpoint of number of at-bats in the majors. I think they're pretty comfortable with his age that if he gets 500 more plate appearances in AAA, they're still on pace for a really productive career.
Who is more likely to accumulate more value by 2026, Jaxon, Wiggins, or Owen Caissie on the Cubs?
Does that factor in like likelihood of getting traded?
Let's assume they're both on the team.
I would still say Caissie. I think that there's decent enough odds that A, someone gets injured, or B, that somewhere in that DH first base range, that like maybe something could open up there in a way that helps Owen break into the majors.
I was texting with a pitching coach about Jaxon Wiggins over the summer, and you look at True Media stuff and everything, and you see a lot of the metrics, and so I'm talking to this coach, and I'm like, just like give it to me straight. Like, what are we looking at with Jaxon Wiggins over here? And he said the stuff is like there, like already. I'm like, so what do you mean? Well, like doesn't have to work on his stuff anymore. I'm like, okay, well, that is just a matter of just familiarity, growing comfortable with the routine, command, etc. Like, yeah, basically. So then my mind went to Greg, what he always used to say, by the way, not Zumach, but Huss, what he always used to say years ago. It's like, well, don't waste the bullets. And so when I look at Wiggins, and right now I know you guys have him towards the back end of your single digits on these rankings, even behind Birdsell, but I'm looking at Wiggins, and if you see him progress through, I'm presuming AA next year to at some point early on in the season, is that fair where he's going to start?
I think he'll start in AA. Yeah.
Okay.
I think he'll probably spend most of the year in AA, regardless of if he's starting there or not. I think he spends most of the season in AA.
So it depends where they are on his health and everything. But assuming, to your point, Bryan, that Owen's not going to get a substantial amount of at-bats, well, by the back end of the summer of 2025, there's a scenario in which their proximity to big league baseball is fairly close together.
Yeah,
if they can close that gap. And if that's the case, then we start talking about, okay, what's more projectable? Good stuff at the big league level or Owen Caissie's profile? I started thinking, well, if he has, for Jaxon Wiggins, one of those fastballs that carries pretty well, that has a lot of actually arm side run, actually looks like Bobby Miller's fastball. If you look at his north to south curveball, a hard tight a slider, a decent off-speed pitch, well, that's 4 pitches right there. And so for him, it's a matter of, okay, accumulating innings. And if we look at just how guys within a normal distribution of stuff, he's a normal guy, not one of those outlier guys, then the confidence with which you can project him is higher to me than other certain pitchers. So I think it's on the surface a question that seems loaded, and maybe it is, but hearing how Caissie's going to be used in 2025, that's what made me think, okay, well, maybe like Jaxon Wiggins, should he progress fast early on in 25, actually maybe given innings, maybe not towards the back half of next year, but as soon as early 2026.
Dude, that's such a good question. That's why we pay you the big bucks. Because
I know.
When you first said it, I was like Owen Caissie, duh. Like the answer to that question is Owen Caissie. And then I sat here and thought about it. It's like you're right. I think Owen Caissie's set up really, really well in his development path. path, right? Where he was just out of the 40-man roster. I think Brian's right, where this year it's like, all right, he gets sprung into action when an injury happens. And I think that's terrific. I think that's a great setup for him, kind of a soft landing for Owen Caissie at the major league level, which I think he needs based on his offensive profile. And then you enter 2026, not 2025, you enter 2026 with the potential that Kyle Tucker is no longer a part of this team. I hope he is. That's a potential that's there. In that case, Owen Caissie can slide right into a starting spot if he needs to. All right. Maybe Kyle Tucker comes back. Maybe he's back with the organization. He re-signs. He's back with the Cubs. Then in that case, you can kind of go back to Owen Caissie and say, okay, well, maybe we have another situation where we use another option year. We kind of get him into the mix in some multiple different offensive or outfield positions, some DH action, and then starting in 2027, well, then Ian Happ's a free agent, right? Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki free agents at that point. So, like, I think that there's a soft, easy landing spot for Owen Caissie over the next couple of years. But you're right that Jaxon Wiggins, it feels like he's more of a splash onto the scene type of guy.
That was kind of thinking I was juggling my brain through.
And it might be as a reliever. Like, it might be as a reliever at first, whether it's the end of probably not the end of 2024, but in 2025, right? Like, maybe they say we'll go the reliever route to start off. And if that's the case, then I think that Owen Caissie, because relievers just can't accumulate WAR in the way that starters can, I think you still give the edge to Owen Caissie there based on the number of at-bats that he could log in Chicago. So I think it would need to be Jaxon Wiggins as a starter. And I'm not entirely as confident that his first cup of coffee in Chicago will be as a starting pitcher as opposed to as a reliever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the amount of development necessary to be major league caliber is, like, I think raw skills wise, they're right there. And I'm with you, Brendan. I think the difference is Wiggins needs a huge jump from where he was last year to be major league caliber. I mean, I actually, it was funny you mentioned talking to a pitching coach, because I remembered a start that I watched of his, and I went back and looked up what I wrote, and I said, really frustrating Jaxon Wiggins start last night. If I was the pitching coach, I'd have gone home last night steaming, because Jaxon is the type of guy that from inning to inning can be totally different. I mean, we saw so much in South Bend last year. Awesome first inning, comes out for the second inning and just cannot find it. His lead leg, he cannot block his lead leg. He is not strong enough. And so he is just flying out there, and his arm is essentially guessing. And so that's how you end up with a 15% walk rate. That walk rate goes to 8%. The stuff is absolutely there. I do think you're right, and I wouldn't have thought it just based, like, right when I heard the question that he could pass Caissie, but we're assuming a pretty substantial developmental jump there.
That's the assumption, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reason I bring this up is we've talked about, like, Stuff Plus models, pitching bot, et cetera. And the way I think about these, and if you talk even to, like, Max or other folks who make these, they're bias is not the right word, so don't put that in statistical terms, but they're heavily weighed on normal distributed pitchers. And so in one sense, you want to find those outlier guys, and the Cubs have done a pretty damn good job doing that recently.
Yep.
But at the same time, the guys who are within that normal distribution, who genuinely rank really high among those peers, I tend to weigh them a little bit heavier. So the lead leg, the high walk rate, the walk per 9 of 5.5 last year, that's not going to play. That has to be improved. But if there's a way to project value, then the question for me is, well, what is the likelihood he can improve that versus just like Hayden Wesneski generating a fastball against left-handed batters? Well, for Jaxon, it seems more likely than Hayden generating a fastball against left-handed batters, which ultimately didn't happen for him. So that's why I kind of posed a question to you. And then it's interesting because you have Brandon Birdsell for Zumach, who's number 8, right behind Jefferson Rojas and above Jaxon Wiggins. And we've heard about the success of Birdsell last season. And of course, Jackson's a little bit younger, but how do you guys view success closer to the big leagues versus someone like Jaxon, who has maybe, besides Horton, some of the best pure stuff in the league? How do you contrast those two? How much weight do you put towards age being close to big league ball versus someone who's younger towards the back end in the lower levels?
It's a really good question. It's something I go back and forth on, and it also plays into my amateur rankings as well. It's something that, because like when I'm evaluating a 22-year-old, 21-year-old, draft eligible junior or senior, and then try to compare that to an 18-year-old, you're also factoring a whole bunch of body projection that is even more challenging than the pro level stuff.
Can they do
So what?
Can they project like body frames that well? Like genuine question here. You always hear that in like sometimes it seems like they're a little off on some guys, but yeah.
I guess I will say I believe that the proprietary data that individual teams have, especially heavy modeling teams like the Cubs, is extremely advanced.
They said I would be 6 foot. I'm 5'10".
Yeah, buddy, join the club, man. I just whatever. Don't go complaining.
That's why I'm
about
talking to you guys now playing second base over there with Caissie.
Yeah, well,
that's the only reason.
Only reason. Here, so, but yeah, height aside, you giants. Like I do believe that there's some biomechanical stuff that they have that they do try to project out. Now, how accurate that is, I don't know, and I don't want to speak out of turn there. But when we talk about, because we kind of got off on a tangent, and I apologize. But when we talk about proximity, it's what Brian's getting to, which is there's not a lot of checkpoints that Brandon Birdsell needs to hit for me to say, like, you could just call him up now and put him in a variety of roles. And over the course of 5 seasons, you're going to probably get some value. It might be as a depth starter. It might be spot starter. It might be just in the pen or a multi-inning role. I feel pretty good about that. Jaxon, I have a lot of questions. And you mentioned like might have almost as good pure stuff as anybody in the system, maybe outside of Horton. I disagree. I think Wiggins is there. I don't think there's any question. I think he has the best pure stuff in the system. No questions asked.
Sorry, who is that? Which name?
Wiggins.
Yeah. That's what I think that's what I said though too. Maybe I misspoke. Sometimes.
Maybe I misheard. I thought you were saying Horton is better. And either way, we were talking about very good prospects.
Yeah.
I think Wiggins is by far just incredible stuff. I have a lot of
so do I, to be clear. I don't know if
yeah, you do. I have a lot of questions about his ability to land in zone. To the point that I wonder if he needs to add like a cutter. Just to find some pitch to just be like, if I just need to get the ball in the strike zone on a 3-0 count, bases loaded, what can I get in zone? And that's what Yu Darvish did, is he just started, throwing cutters to land in zone. So I guess getting back to it, I think Birdsell, you could throw him on the major league roster right now. And over the course of 5 seasons, you're going to get value. I don't think he needs to do much. Wiggins, if you told me this guy literally gets 0 value in the major leagues, I'd say that's at least within the range of outcomes. Although I think it's light.
Is Brandon Birdsell in his situation all that much different than Hayden Wesneski, who we just traded away? I know like they're different pitchers, but until like what you just described, Zumach is a guy that is likely ready for the major leagues in some capacity. How good he can be at the major leagues and what role he takes on in the major leagues is more of a question, kind of like what Hayden Wesneski. Like Hayden Wesneski was too good for AAA, but where did he fit in the major league level was more of a question mark up until the time that he was traded, right? Like up until right now. And so I don't think that is all that different between Birdsell and a guy like Hayden Wesneski.
I don't think it is either, but I think we do have to acknowledge that Wesneski has produced positive major league value.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah. So but if you put this in front of me and said, okay, but let's say 5 years from now, you've got a guy that needs to make, and we can just say a playoff appearance. We don't need to say a playoff start. Who are you taking? Gosh, I don't know. I mean, there's a pretty decent chance that I would just pick Wiggins and just roll with upside on there. So it's a nuanced question. It's one I don't always feel comfortable with.
The other thing that I might point out is, we talk a lot when guys are in the minors about their raw stuff, and baseball teams obviously using stuff plus more and more. But tell me, do big league hitters see 98 mile per hour fastballs more, or do they see guys that throw with the level of deception that Brandon Birdsell throws with more? I would say that Birdsell is actually a more unique look for a hitter than Wiggins, who he might have, 85th, 90th percentile stuff if we compare him to major league pitchers. But hitters in the majors see 98 mile per hour fastballs with 14 inches of run like once a series at least, right? Brandon Birdsell's doing something. He's providing a look that's different than all but, I don't know, 3 major league pitchers that I can like, Gratterall, and I don't know who else can, like that Jesus Tinoco that pitched for the Cubs last year. Like those are like the only guys that I can think of that even throw like Brandon at all. So like unicorns come in different shapes and sizes and looks, and Wiggins might be approaching unicorn status with his stuff, but I don't think he's quite there. Birdsell might be a unicorn with how he looks.
Brendan, can I ask you a question about Brandon Birdsell? Because I know that I think I saw Nick Pollock with Pitcher List on social media recently talking about Brandon Birdsell and his extension, and how basically his extension is the lowest, the shortest, the smallest of any pitcher in Major League Baseball, right? He just does not extend to the plate, and you can see it like what Brian was hinting at. Like you can see it clear as day that he does not extend to the plate. How much is that a good thing? Like Pollock was talking about it in a bad way, right? Like it's bad because typically you want more extension. That gives the hitter less time to react to a pitch. That gives the hitter that gives the pitcher more time to be able to mask fastball with a slider, or a slider with a cutter, or a changeup with a fastball, whatever it might be. But how much of that is also like hitters just don't see this at all from an extension this small? Like how much of that is positive? How much of that is purely negative?
When you start seeing results that go with unique, in his case, shorter extension, then there's at some point you have to weigh the results as reality instead of trying to project and use models. And I think as like public fans, we look at stuff models and we try to fit everyone into this, again, normal distribution. And that's just not the case. To Brian's point about being a unicorn, that's absolutely true. For other fans, there's a level of discomfort because there is an unknown to that and projecting value. When you see success with unique traits, you have to value and weigh that success more than the predictions. And so is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's to be determined, but it is unique. And because it's unique, some teams, coaches, whomever may be willing to take more of that risk. And if they are able to deploy someone like that, well, then you're going to get your answer. You're going to get your information, and you can start building, hypotheses, questions, and better models for those guys. So is it a good thing or a bad thing? He's getting success. We'll see one way or another, but it is interesting that he's having success in the manner of a short extension. Typically, you don't want short extension. When you have unique outlier traits like that, then it starts making you ask different questions. All right, let's move along here. We're at the 58-minute marker, and we're not even in the double digits yet. So this is my fault. I got over here thinking about myself playing second base with Dansby Swanson over here. Let's move along. Cristian Hernandez. Okay. The first time I saw him many years ago, my mind went to Alex Rodriguez. And the only reason I thought that was because of the way he finished his at-bat. Not saying he's A-Rod or anything, but you look at his like unusual developmental timeline, started off super, super hyped, had some lows, has made some strides recently. Where do you guys see him, and exactly what does he need to improve? And seeing him number 11 on the list, at least from my perspective, right? I don't follow the fine minutia that you guys do. I'm actually a little surprised to even see him still that high up. Is that something that's actually within your close circles, somewhat controversial, that he is still somewhat high and even close to single digits?
I'll lead off with just a few comments and pass it to you other guys here. I'm looking through. Looks like, Zumach, you have Cristian at 10. And both Brian and myself have Cristian at number 11. The way I'm viewing Cristian Hernandez right now is you kind of jumped onto the boat. It started rocking real bad one direction, and then it started you kind of overcompensated, started rocking way back the other direction, and we've kind of started to figure out, all right, we're leveling out a little bit. We figured out what we got with Cristian Hernandez, and to me, with the way that the organization is set up right now in terms of the depth of prospects, I think that like that 10 to 15 range is kind of that sweet spot for Cristian Hernandez, right? Where like he is not that super, super high upside prospect that we once thought he would be as a young teenager. I think that now we can kind of view him as more just a normal prospect, right? Like he's a guy that made it up to AA or made it up to high A. That's going to spend some time in AA this year as a 20-year-old. Like I think that like we can just start viewing him instead of that like the A-Rod comps and the number one international free agent signing. It's like now we can just evaluate him for him, and I think that like he does some things very, very well. I still think he plays really good middle infield defense. I still think he runs the bases just as good as almost anybody in this organization. I think both in terms of his speed, but also his base running ability. I think he's really, really good at that. And I think that he's proven the ability to change from a guy who is swinging and missing a lot to a guy who's making a lot more contact. Like he
and that's
does
the most
all
encouraging thing for me too.
Yeah, like he does the small things well. He seems to take to coaching really well, and like I really appreciate that from Cristian Hernandez, the baseball player. So I don't know, Bryan, I'll kick it to you next, but like that's all I've got on Cristian Hernandez. I really like what I've seen from him over the past like year and his ability to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big thing, right? He improved on his biggest weakness, and then he didn't really give back anything in way of his strengths. I think you hit on it that like defense plus base running is a net positive in a way that probably only James Triantos in the system matched this year. And then to get that strikeout rate under 20%, to get the walk rate up near 15, I mean, it was just really impressive. I mean, to me, it's really not going to matter if we're still talking about a guy hitting 50% ground balls that isn't accessing his power at all. But I think what's exciting about Cristian is if you watch him take batting practice, and, you know, since he was 15 years old, they say like, this is a guy that can hit the ball extremely far. It's just they really backed off on that because it was trending in the wrong direction. Now, can they reintroduce that? Well, then we're going to have a pretty exciting player again. But I think that there is some fear in the system that when they do reintroduce that it's going to have sort of negative overall impacts. And so, you know, in some ways, he's probably the most intriguing guy to watch in 2025 to see what that next look is.
Johnny Long, looks like he's making his name recently. Again, at least in the MLB spheres, I see his name's popping up, and I see him right now on Bryan's list. He's number 10. He's ahead of Cristian. Expectations just very quickly on Johnny Long. I know he's kind of progressed maybe at an unpredictable pace. Maybe it's not even fair to say unpredictable pace, but exactly what is he doing? And is there a world in which he is used as a trade piece in the upcoming next few months? Could he see major league at bats within the next year and a half? What do we think?
Definitely think that some teams are going to ask for him as the extra piece in trades. To me, you're going to need to see the AA really above average performance happen again for me to fully believe it. You know, we're a year removed from Hayden McGeary conversations being really excited. Hayden came back, struggled to repeat it in AA. The AA quality really fell apart towards the end of last year on the pitching side of things. I think was not the same league as it was in the first half. So I want to see it again. Really intrigued by the player.
Why is BJ Murray so much lower? Right. I mean, he's coming off 2023 AAA.
Yeah. Last year was just a rough season for BJ results wise. I thought that everything I was kind of worried about happening to him as he made it up to AAA happened. Right. His inability to really show really good power at the plate has kind of come back to hurt him a little bit, because his driving force at the plate was that he worked counts and drew walks. And as you climb the ladder, pitchers get better. They don't need to challenge you. They don't need to, or I guess they can challenge you a little bit more and not be worried about a guy hitting for more power off of you. So he did hit into some bad batted ball luck, I thought, from watching him a little bit. So that's why I still have him on my list. I have him at 34. I know Bryan has him up in the 20s at 20. Didn't you have him in there?
He's not on mine.
24.
24, and then Zumach, you did not include him, but that's why I still included him in the back part of my rankings, which is, I think that like there was some batted ball luck there.
Where was he?
I'm still really worried about him though.
Where was he at the back end or middle of 2023 for you guys?
In the late teens for me.
Yeah, I think early 20s for me.
That was probably right around the 20s. I probably dropped him about 10, 15 slots.
Okay, so moving down back on the end of the list over here, I see Pedro Ramirez back in 25 for Brian's list. I saw Pedro's name come up on your guys' other list.
Zumac, you want to talk about Pedro? Because I know
Yeah,
that Brian, you have Pedro at 25.
Right.
Zumac, you have Pedro at 14.
I mean, it's quite a big difference in rankings right there.
And I'm smack dab in the middle at 19. Pedro was one of the hardest people for prospects for me to rank.
Yes.
So Zumac, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no. So really quickly, so just for some clarity, I break him into tiers. So he actually would have been in the same tier as the 20s. It was like the edge of that. I don't know. I asked around on him. He's had some good batted ball data for the past couple years. He just consistently is putting up like above average. I just think he's like a little spark plug, second base, third base. Maybe I gravitate towards that. I don't know.
No, dude. I think if I can interrupt real quick.
Go for it.
I think if you ask coaches would have Pedro Ramirez ranked top 10 in this organization. I think because he is like spark plug. Like he is like.
What do you mean by that?
He's a dirt bag. Like I think that like he's fun to watch on the bases. He's diving after balls on the infield. He's not necessarily a good infield defender, but he's diving after everything. He's getting dirty. Like he's who coaches love. Unfortunately, I just don't like. There's not a whole lot of projectability in Pedro Ramirez. Like I don't see him as like a starting second baseman. He's definitely not a third baseman. So like he has to carve out like a utility role in the majors, and I don't know that like I have to squint to really see that even. But like you talk to coaches and they love him.
Yeah, no, I think he needs to keep hitting. I think he needs to absolutely keep hitting. Okay. I think he needs to absolutely keep hitting. And it's just going to be something that he's just going to need to keep proving. So
I see Frankie Scalzo Jr. on the back end of Greg's list, which, by the way, great interview you had with Frankie. Love the guy's personality. I see Frankie. I see Arias. I see the Cubs back end of their potential bullpen reserve. And I see a lot of walks with a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
What is your feel for the Cubs' high walk rate in AAA? Is it a matter of personnel and the pitchers they've targeted? Is it a matter of them trying to maximize stuff at, again, these are not fair words, but just at the cost of perhaps stable, consistent mechanics or command? And how do we contrast that looking at those guys versus the younger folks like Jaxon, Wiggins? And is there lessons to be learned from your guys' perspective on seeing how some of the AAA current pitchers have progressed over the past few years, including even like Cam Smith in this conversation, and Porter Hodge, who's now at big league level in the back end of the Cubs bullpen? Is there lessons to be learned for that group versus the younger pitchers that you've taken away over the past 18 months?
I mean, the funny thing is that I think if you asked us a year ago of like the relievers in the system, who were you like not confident would come to the majors and be able to throw consistent strikes? Porter would have been really high. His feel in the minors was bad. Yeah. And so in some ways, to answer your question, what I've learned is like, you just don't know. There's something about the major league moment, right? That like, you see Daniel Palencia on a major league mound and he looks less comfortable than he does when you watch him in Iowa. Like, just like you can see it. Porter did not have that impact. And actually, as the leverage got higher and higher, he seemed to like raise his game to match that level. And so that's really interesting. So like the other thing I think, AAA,
is there a way to do that faster, you think, like to get that information more without like really harming your 40 man?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that you can,
that would
mimic the heart rate that you're going to get when you step on a big league mound in any other.
And they can't track it. That's something in the CBA. That is something the teams wanted, is they wanted to track heart rate and other bio signals to see who would basically respond to the moment. And the union made a very clear point that will not be allowed. They would not sign a CBA.
Privacy concerns. Is that why?
Yeah,
that's fair.
And so I think actually one player that I'm fascinated to see in 2025, like where is that heartbeat, is Jack Neely, who I think is the highest ranked reliever for all of us. Jack, a unicorn pitch, to go back to that conversation, he has that already. To me, it's just a question of, is he going to be comfortable on a big league mound? Is he going to be comfortable throwing that fastball the amount that he's going to have to throw it? Because, he knows it's not quite enough for big league hitters. And he's going to want to lean as hard as he can on the breaking ball. But if he can just get the confidence to say, you know what, I'm going to shove that fastball 40% of the time at him, and I'm going to live with the results, throw enough strikes to do it, I think he's going to have success. But if he starts to get nervous, like, we know what big league hitters do to that.
Zumach, I've got 4 relievers on my top 40. I've got Jack Neely at 16, like 4 true relievers, I guess. I've got Jack Neely at 16, Riley Martin at 36, Michael Arias at 38, and Frankie Scalzo at 39. Who, whether it's those 4 guys or somebody else in mind, who is your, like, who's your who ranks first in your dog rankings? Like, who do you think could go do it on a major league mound? Like, who does the Porter Hodge thing? It's tough. I don't know.
I don't have a good answer for there. Because again, I kind of want to see people do it. I loved what Riley Martin did to lock things down at probably one of the most important parts of his career. Like right at the end of the season, like he gave teams a thought about whether to take him in the Rule 5. He probably gave the Cubs at least the conversation of whether they should protect him on the Rule 5. It ultimately didn't happen, but I think that took some nails to do that. And so if I had to pick one person right now to just be an absolute dog out there, I mean, I think Scalzo's a bit of a dog on the mound, but I mean, if I had just had to like pick somebody to toss on a major league mound right now and just, all right, figure it out, probably Riley Martin.
I mean, it helps when you strike out 37% of the batters you face, right? So
pretty much.
That will do it. All right. Any last comments on these lists here? I know we're like 70 minutes. Try to zip through the back end. I think for me, just to wrap up my thoughts whenever I see lists like these, I basically am like lockstep with you guys. Like I would basically put the top 9 exactly how you guys would put it. Maybe just flip it up a little, around a few of the rankings a little bit. But I think the one guy we didn't touch on maybe more than I had hoped, and that's just me going through the guys I want to talk to you first, was just like Jefferson Rojas. He had a lot of hype. The age carried the hype because of the success as an 18-year-old. I think fell back a little bit from my perspective, just seeing the pace of other guys going through the system. But just to wrap up thoughts here, Jefferson Rojas, what exactly does he need to do in your guys' opinion? And is there a world where we're doing this again next year where he's a top 3 prospect for this Cubs farm system?
Definitely think that there's that world. I think at the end of the day, he's just got to put the results in play. We need to see the performance that matches the tools. We need to see a little more hint that power's coming. And he'll get there. It's just, I think a 90th percentile exit velocity is a really nice thing on paper.
That will work.
What's more nice on paper. And so it's like that kind of stuff is where Jefferson needs to take the next step forward, is just get it done.
I mean, if he hits the ball in the air a little bit more, I think that he looks a whole lot different in 2020.
You think the swing lends itself to more fly balls?
Yeah, I think it could. I think it's probably attacking the right pitches in order to hit the ball in the air more, less so than changing his swing to hit the ball in the air.
So it's a matter of just swing decisions and basically exposure and
having a game plan up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's just really good, so he can go out there and just start swinging. But I think that like once he reaches AA, it's like, hey, you can't just go up there and just start swinging because you're really good. Like you actually have to have a game plan up there. So yeah, I think that especially between, I could see him getting significantly better, and I could see a lot of different graduations from the guys above him for prospect status. I think there's a very real possibility we see him as a top 3 prospect this time next year. Yeah.
All right.
Well, maybe next week if Jed Hoyer just trades everybody, right?
And on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap this show up. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. I enjoyed having the 4 of us. I don't know how it plays in podcast form, but it's fun seeing
I
you
think
guys'
we did a
faces
good job. I think I pretty much nailed the hosting over here. I'm gonna
I
start
think,
taking
yeah.
over Corey's job.
Unfortunately, yeah, you can clip this and send it in your video resume to Corey
That's
for
right.
for
Coming
better
for you.
hosting. So
Huss,
Brendan,
Huss, I need to tell you that I was determined not to look at your list today as I reorganized mine, but I checked where you had Luis Martinez Gomez and I put him one spot higher on my list so that I can say I'm the highest on him when he breaks out this year. So
that's incredible.
Oh, give me 30 seconds. Now I need to hear the story. Just give me 30 seconds. What's the story?
Luis Martinez Gomez is a guy who had like, I think 2 outings on video last year at all. And one of them I thought was just absolutely incredible and a guy that has developed really well in the system. And so I am determined to be the highest on him, as I once was with Jefferson Rojas, and then Lance Brazdowski threw his ranking in at the very end that you had him even higher than me. So I saw Huss at 22 and I was like,
incredible.
Screw that. I'm going 21. I don't
There
care.
you go.
That's
like
incredible.
that.
Luis Martinez Gomez was a guy that I think that caught all of our eyes when he got drafted. Like, it was kind of a unique situation. I think he had good stuff and all that good stuff. I think I was just waiting for him to come up to Myrtle Beach and do something impressive so I could rank him there. Because if he would have come up this year and put up like a 6, like given up 6 runs over the course of 2 outings, then I couldn't have ranked him at 20. I mean, I could have. I probably still would have ranked him top 30, but I couldn't have ranked him at 22 and gotten away with it. The fact that he came in one outing or whatever and looked tremendous, that's all I needed. That's all I needed to put him there at 22.
Just
and
one?
you at 21
like
apparently. Yeah. But Brendan, you want to plug yourself? Where can we find you?
Yeah, Corey and I do a show every Friday at CSGO Cubs. We've been doing a podcast for 10 years. I'll plug the rest of the guys at CSGO. They do daily work, daily podcasts. Luke, Ryan Herrera, Cody Del Mendo, Jared Willis, Kevin Wells, the rest of those guys. Go ahead and read and listen to them. And that's it. I listen to you guys all the time. Enjoy your work. It's fun to see Greg Huss, not Zumach, well, Zumach too, the podcast grow over the past 5 years. And I'm looking forward to hanging out and talking more with you guys and showing off my prospect knowledge that I don't get to do sometimes. I think I did an okay job. We'll see.
Hey, you held your own for sure. I think
I was a little nervous. Once we got to the 50-minute marker, I'm looking at the back end of the list, and then my pronunciation of the names, which I can't say so many names. It's just my issue. I think I did an okay job.
On the bright side, people will let you know in the comments on YouTube how awful or how good of a job you did. So that's always fun.
I'm well aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you guys know where to find me, Zumach, and Bryan. You can find us on social media. You can find us over the 1060 West Discord channel where we are chatting it up all the time. So go check us out over there.
Also, that's been my favorite addition to the whole Cubs online community is that Discord. For real, I find myself more in Discord than I do on Twitter these days. So, if you haven't gone on Discord, go on Discord. It reminds me of my 13-year-old self when I was on the Cubs internet forums, going through the pages, getting my news. It's nostalgic for me.
Yeah, if anyone wants an invite code, hit up me or Zumach and we'll get you in there.
All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You can find us on all the podcasting platforms, on the Northside Bound YouTube channel. Check us out there. Give us a like, give us a subscription, give us a comment. We really appreciate your support, and we will be back in your ears in 2 short weeks. Thanks, guys.
Go Tucker.